Love is a language that knows no boundaries. It does not need words, nor does it follow the rules of the world we know. Sometimes it exists in the most unexpected places, between hearts that should have never met. Yet, somehow, they do. This is the story of an unbreakable bond, a connection so pure, so powerful, that it defied nature itself. A story of two souls who found each other in a world that told them they didn't belong together. It began with a girl, young and full of wonder, searching for meaning in a world that had taken so much from her. And a gorilla, lost and abandoned, yearning for the love he had never known. What started as a fragile connection soon became something extraordinary. A friendship beyond words, beyond species. One built on trust, kindness, and a love so deep it could be felt without ever being spoken. But love is never easy, and sometimes the ones we hold closest are the ones we must say goodbye to. This story will break your heart, but it will also show you the true meaning of love. Stay with us until the end, because what happens next will leave you in tears. Mila was just 10 years old when she first stepped into the wildlife sanctuary, a place that felt more like home than anywhere else in the world. After losing her parents in a tragic accident, she found solace among the animals, where the quiet whispers of nature replaced the noise of her grief. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment she met Kumba. He was just a baby then, small, fragile, and orphaned, much like Mila herself. His deep brown eyes held a sorrow she understood too well, a loneliness that mirrored her own. And in that instant, something unspoken passed between them. Two lost souls recognizing each other, drawn together by something neither could explain. At first, Kumba was cautious, his tiny hands clinging to the wooden beams of his enclosure, watching Mila from a distance. But she was patient. Every day she sat near him, speaking softly, offering fruits, and waiting for him to come closer on his own terms. Slowly, his fear melted away. He reached out, first with hesitant fingers, then with trust, until one day he grasped her hand and held it tightly. That was the moment their bond truly began. As the months passed, Mila and Kumba became inseparable. She would read to him under the shade of the ancient trees, her voice filling the air with stories of faraway lands. He would mimic her laughter, tilting his head in curiosity, as if trying to understand the emotions behind each word. They played together, running through the tall grass, rolling in the dirt, their joy echoing through the sanctuary. To Kumba, Mila wasn't just a caretaker, she was family. And to Mila, Kumba was more than just an animal. He was her best friend, her confidant, the one who filled the empty spaces in her heart. But their connection was more than just companionship. Mila noticed the way Kumba watched her closely, how he seemed to sense her emotions. When she was sad, he would sit beside her in silence, his gentle presence a comfort no words could provide. When she was happy, he would clap his hands, excited by her laughter. It was as if they had created their own language, one without words, but rich with meaning. And as their bond grew stronger, Mila made a promise to always be there for him, just as he had been there for her. Their bond grew deeper with each passing day, an unspoken connection that needed no explanation. Mila spent hours by Kumba's side, teaching him simple gestures, watching in awe as he mimicked her movements with surprising intelligence. It started with small things, a wave, a nod, a playful clap. But soon, Kumba began to understand more. Mila would point to herself and say her name, and after weeks of patience, Kumba tapped his chest and made a soft, guttural sound, his own way of calling her. It wasn't just mimicry, it was understanding. And with that understanding came something even more powerful: love. Kumba's affection for Mila was unmistakable. He would bring her small gifts, leaves, flowers, even smooth stones he found along the riverbank. placing them in her hands with a proud little grunt. Mila treasured each one, knowing they were more than just objects. They were messages, silent but filled with meaning. And then there were the moments that took her breath away. The times when Kumba, sensing her sadness, would gently press his forehead against hers, his large warm hand resting over her own. No words were needed. In those moments, she felt his love as clearly as if he had spoken it aloud. But it wasn't just Mila who felt this bond. The caretakers at the sanctuary noticed it too. They marveled at how Kumba responded to Mila in ways he never did with anyone else. He listened to her, sought her out, and even seemed to protect her. Once, when Mila tripped and scraped her knee, Kumba rushed to her side, his face filled with worry as he lightly touched her injury, as if trying to heal her with his presence alone. It was moments like these that made everyone realize this was not just a friendship. It was something much deeper, something rare and extraordinary. Mila often wondered if Kumba could truly understand her emotions, or if she was only imagining it. But one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she got her answer. She had been feeling unusually quiet that day, lost in thoughts of her parents, their absence a familiar ache in her heart. Without a word, Kumba shuffled closer, wrapped his long arms around her, and pulled her into a gentle embrace. It was deliberate, full of warmth, full of knowing. And as Mila buried her face into his thick fur, tears slipping down her cheeks, she realized the truth. Kumba didn't just understand her pain. He felt it too. Mila knew their time together couldn't last forever, but she never thought the day would come so soon. The sanctuary had always been a temporary home for Kumba, a place of safety until he was strong enough to return to the wild. The caretakers had been preparing him for this moment for months, teaching him how to find food, how to navigate the dense jungle, how to survive on his own. But no one prepared Mila for the pain of saying goodbye. The announcement came one afternoon. Kumba would be released in just a few days. Mila's heart sank. She had always known this was the plan, but knowing it and accepting it were two different things. How could she let go of the one soul who had filled the emptiness in her heart, the one who had been her family when she had no one else? The days that followed were bittersweet. Mila tried to be strong, smiling through the pain as she spent every moment she could with Kumba. She took him to his favorite spots, let him play in the river a little longer, let him hold her hand just a little tighter, but Kumba could sense the change. He watched Mila more closely, tilting his head in quiet confusion whenever her smile wavered. Whenever her eyes held a sadness she tried to hide. And then, on the final night, when the sanctuary was quiet and the world felt still, she sat beside him, resting her head against his massive shoulder. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Kumba understood. The morning of the release was bright and unbearably beautiful, as if the world had no idea how much her heart was breaking. The caretakers led Kumba toward the transport enclosure that would take him deep into the jungle, where he would finally be free. Mila walked beside him, her fingers lightly brushing his thick fur, every step feeling heavier than the last. When they reached the edge of the clearing, she finally turned to face him, her throat tight with unshed tears. "I love you, Kumba," she whispered, her voice trembling. And then, before she could stop herself, she lifted her hand and signed the words in the way she had taught him. For a moment, Kumba just stared at her, his deep, knowing eyes locked onto hers. Then, slowly, he raised his own hand and signed it back. "I love you." The breath caught in Mila's chest as her tears finally spilled over. The caretakers opened the enclosure, and Kumba hesitated, glancing between the open jungle and the girl who had been his world. Then, with one last lingering look, he turned and stepped forward, disappearing into the trees. And just like that, he was gone. Mila stood frozen, the ache in her chest unbearable, her hand still raised in the sign they had shared. She had known this day would come, but nothing could have prepared her for the emptiness he left behind. The years passed, but the ache in Mila's heart never truly faded. She often found herself looking toward the horizon, wondering where Kumba was, if he was safe, if he ever thought about her the way she thought about him. Life moved forward, but some bonds are too strong to be left behind. She pursued her dream of becoming a wildlife researcher, dedicating her life to understanding the creatures she had always felt connected to. And then, one day, fate brought her back to the very place where it all began, the jungle where Kumba had been released. She had joined a research expedition to study the wild gorilla population, but in her heart, she knew the truth. She wasn't just searching for data. She was searching for him. The air was thick with humidity as Mila stepped through the dense foliage, her boots sinking into the damp earth. The calls of distant gorillas echoed through the trees, but none of them belonged to Kumba. She had prepared herself for the reality that she might never see him again, that he might have moved far beyond the area, or worse, that he might not have survived. But then something shifted. A rustling in the trees, a low, familiar grunt. Mila froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Slowly she turned, her breath hitching as she saw him, taller, stronger, his once small frame now powerful and commanding. But it was the eyes that stopped her in her tracks, deep, familiar, filled with recognition. Kumba. For a moment, neither of them moved. The jungle seemed to hold its breath around them. Then, in a single, breathtaking instant, Kumba took a step forward. And then another. Mila felt her legs tremble, but she didn't back away. Her hands shook as she lifted them, forming a gesture she had not used in years. "I love you." The world fell silent as Kumba stared at her, and then, just as he had all those years ago, he raised his hand and signed it back. Tears streamed down Mila's face as Kumba closed the distance between them, reaching out with his massive hands and pulling her into an embrace. He held her the way he used to, as if no time had passed at all, as if she had never truly left his heart. The researchers watched in stunned silence, witnessing something that defied everything they knew about animal behavior. But Mila didn't need an explanation. She already knew the truth. Love, real love, never fades. It doesn't disappear with time or distance. It waits. And in that moment, she realized Kumba had been waiting for her just as she had been waiting for him. Mila held on to Kumba, her fingers gripping his thick fur as if afraid he might vanish. But he didn't. He stayed, his massive arms wrapped around her in the same gentle way he had always embraced her. The years apart had changed them both. Mila was no longer the little girl who had once sat beside him in the sanctuary, and Kumba was no longer the fragile orphan she had cared for. But in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that after all this time, after all the distance, their bond had never broken. He still knew her. He still remembered. The researchers around her whispered in disbelief, their voices hushed as they witnessed something extraordinary. A wild gorilla, one who had spent years learning to survive on his own, still holding on to a love he was never supposed to understand. Mila pulled back slightly, looking up at him, searching his familiar eyes. "I missed you," she whispered, knowing he wouldn't understand the words. But Kumba didn't need to. He let out a deep, rumbling sound, low and soothing, the same sound he used to make when they sat together in the quiet of the sanctuary. It was his way of saying he had missed her too. Mila knew she couldn't stay forever. Kumba belonged here now, in the wild, among his own kind. But knowing he was safe, knowing he was happy, was enough. She reached up one last time, brushing her fingers gently against his cheek before stepping back. Kumba watched her, his head tilting slightly, as if sensing what was coming. Mila smiled through her tears, lifting her hand in the gesture she had taught him so long ago. "I love you." And just like before, Kumba signed it back. As Mila turned to leave, she didn't feel the ache of loss this time. She didn't feel the unbearable emptiness that had once haunted her. Instead, she felt something else. Peace. Because love, real love, never fades. It doesn't disappear with time or distance. It remains, waiting for the day it is finally found again. And as she walked away, she knew one thing for certain. She and Kumba would always be a part of each other, no matter where life took them. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe in love again. Because sometimes, the purest love stories are the ones that don't need words at all.